A teacher protects a disabled boy, which leads to a start of something new. But how does one small act of kindness turn a stranger's life upside down? And why would a man with limitless power and wealth suddenly risk it all after witnessing this teacher's courage? The answers lie in a hidden past, a vulnerable child, and a moment that could change all their lives forever. Will a heart once locked away finally open to the person who saved his son? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The soft morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of room 12, where Ms. Nira Ayres had already arranged the day's activities with meticulous care. The classroom hummed with gentle classical music, Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, chosen specifically for its soothing qualities. She dimmed the fluorescent lights, replacing their harsh glare with the warm glow of salt lamps strategically placed around the room. Nira smoothed her cotton cardigan and checked the visual schedule displayed prominently on the wall one last time. Each activity was represented by clear, simple pictures: morning circle, sensory work, snack time, reading, and more. Structure and predictability were essential for her students, especially Noah. Speaking of Noah, the small 7-year-old sat cross-legged in his designated quiet corner, completely absorbed in the texture board before him. His delicate fingers traced over each surface, smooth silk, rough burlap, soft velvet, with careful precision. Nira watched as his shoulders relaxed with each exploratory touch. "Good morning, everyone," Nira said softly as her other students settled into their morning routines. She used sign language simultaneously, her hands flowing through the familiar gestures. Noah's eyes flickered briefly toward her movement before returning to his board, but she caught the slight upturn of his lips. That tiny smile meant everything. The morning progressed smoothly through their usual activities. Noah participated in his own way, using simple signs when he needed help or wanted to share something he'd discovered. During circle time, he sat slightly apart from the group but remained engaged, his bright eyes following Nira's movements as she led their morning songs. After lunch, however, came the afternoon's challenge: play rehearsal in the auditorium. Nira had prepared Noah as best she could, showing him pictures of the space and practicing their quiet hands signal, their special way of finding calm when things got overwhelming. The auditorium buzzed with activity as several classes gathered for rehearsal. Children chatted excitedly, prop pieces clattered, and footsteps echoed off the high ceiling. Nira kept close to Noah, watching for early signs of distress. He clutched his comfort item, a small, smooth stone, in his pocket, something they'd worked out together as a grounding tool. At first, Noah managed well, standing at the edge of the group and following the simple movements they'd practiced. But then, someone dropped a metal prop with a resounding crash, and the drama teacher's voice boomed through the space, instructing everyone to move to different positions. The sudden cacophony was too much. Noah's hands flew to his ears, his body beginning to rock back and forth. His breathing quickened, and his eyes squeezed shut against the sensory assault. Several students turned to stare, which only intensified his distress. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Mrs. Peterson, one of the other teachers, strode toward Noah with obvious frustration. "Stop making a scene. Everyone else is managing just fine." Nira moved swiftly, positioning herself between Noah and Mrs. Peterson. She crouched down to Noah's eye level, her movements deliberate and calm. Her hands formed the familiar sign for quiet hands, a gentle reminder of their safe space. "It's okay, Noah," she murmured, keeping her voice low and steady. "I'm here. Let's find our calm together." She demonstrated deep breaths, knowing Noah might pick up on the rhythm even if he couldn't see her through his closed eyes. Gradually, Noah's rocking slowed. His hands lowered slightly from his ears, and his eyes opened, finding Nira's gentle gaze. The tension in his small frame began to ease, and then, Like sunshine breaking through clouds, a small smile appeared. He leaned forward, resting his head against her shoulder, seeking the pressure that helped him feel secure. Neera maintained the peaceful moment, creating a bubble of calm amid the auditorium's chaos. She signed "safe" and "together," words they'd practiced countless times. Noah's breathing synchronized with hers, his trust in her evident in every relaxing muscle. Hours later, after her students had gone home, Neera sat at her desk with Noah's progress file open before her. Her fingers moved swiftly across her keyboard as she documented the day's events in detail. She noted Noah's initial successful management of the new environment, the specific triggers that led to his overwhelm, and the successful de-escalation techniques. Opening a new email to the principal, Neera chose her words carefully but firmly. Today's incident in the auditorium highlights our urgent need for comprehensive sensory processing training for all staff members. While Noah showed remarkable progress in managing a challenging environment, inappropriate staff intervention nearly undid weeks of careful trust building. Her office grew darker as she finished her reports, the evening sun casting long shadows across her desk. She gathered her things, her shoulders heavy with the day's emotional weight. As she switched off her classroom lights, she had no idea that her detailed documentation was already generating responses at levels far above her pay grade. Across town, in the back of a sleek black car, Elias Vale's expression hardened as he read the school's report on his tablet. His jaw clenched, muscles working beneath his precisely trimmed beard. The soft leather seat creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes scanning every word about his son's distress. His finger hovered over the screen, pausing at phrases like "inappropriate intervention" and "lack of proper training." The passing streetlights cast alternating patterns of light and shadow across his face, highlighting the growing tension in his features. The Tuesday morning sun painted soft rectangles on room 12's carpet as Neera arranged sensory tools and learning materials for the day ahead. She hummed quietly while setting out texture cards and fidget tools, each item placed with purpose in their designated spots. The familiar routine helped center her after yesterday's challenges. The peaceful morning air carried the gentle whir of the classroom's air purifier and the distant chatter of early arriving teachers. Neera adjusted the visual schedule, ensuring each picture card aligned perfectly with today's activities. She'd just finished setting up the reading corner with weighted lap pads and compression cushions when a distinct sound cut through the morning calm. The powerful purr of an expensive engine drew closer, then fell silent. Neera glanced through the classroom window, catching sight of a sleek black luxury car that seemed out of place in the modest school parking lot. Something about its presence made her straighten her cardigan and smooth her hair. Minutes later, measured footsteps echoed down the hallway. The classroom door opened with deliberate control, revealing a tall figure who commanded attention without effort. Elias Vale stood in the doorway, his tailored charcoal suit and steel gray tie speaking of wealth and authority. His face bore the same controlled expression Neera had seen in news photos of corporate acquisitions and charity galas. "Ms. Ayres." His voice was cool and precise. "I need to speak with you about yesterday's incident." He stepped into the room, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. His eyes swept the classroom, taking in every detail with the same analytical focus he likely used in boardrooms. Neera squared her shoulders, maintaining her calm demeanor. "Mr. Vale, good morning. I was actually hoping to speak with you about Noah's progress." "Progress?" His eyebrow arched slightly. "Is that what you call disrupting his established routine?" The specialized program we developed with his previous therapeutic team took months to implement. He pulled out his phone, consulting it briefly. "According to the report, you interfered with standard protocols during his stress response." Neera took a steady breath, her voice remaining gentle but firm. "Mr. Vale, I understand your concern. However, what you're calling interference was actually an evidence-based intervention using techniques specifically designed for Noah's needs. And what qualifies you to make that assessment? Elias's words carried a sharp edge. Do you have any idea how many specialists have worked with my son? How many degrees and certifications they hold? I have my master's in special education with a focus on sensory processing disorders, Nira replied, maintaining eye contact. But more importantly, I've spent the last 3 months getting to know Noah, learning his unique signals, his triggers, and what helps him feel safe. She moved to her desk, retrieving Noah's progress file. Would you like to see his communication log? We've developed a consistent sign language system that works for him. He's shown remarkable progress in... The soft click of the classroom door interrupted her. Noah stood in the doorway, his Batman backpack clutched tight against his chest. His eyes darted between his father and Nira, his small frame tensing at the unfamiliar scene. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Elias's expression changed, softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at his son. "Noah," he said, his voice gentler but still uncertain, as if speaking to a stranger he wished to know better. Noah remained in the doorway, his fingers working the strap of his backpack in a familiar, self-soothing pattern. Nira waited, giving him time to process the situation. She didn't call out or approach him, trusting him to make his own choice. After what felt like minutes, but was likely only seconds, Noah took a small step forward, then another. But instead of moving toward his father, he walked directly to Nira. His small hand reached out, grasping the sleeve of her cardigan as he pressed against her side. His other hand made the sign for safe. The change in Elias Vale was dramatic. His carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath. His lips parted slightly, eyes wide with wonder and something that looked like pain. Nira recognized the expression. It was the face of a parent seeing their child do something they'd begun to believe impossible. He ... Elias's voice was barely above a whisper. He doesn't initiate contact, not since Sarah. He trailed off, swallowing hard. Nira's heart softened at the vulnerability in his voice, though she maintained her professional demeanor. Noah communicates in his own way, Mr. Vale. He shows trust through proximity and touch when he feels secure. She smiled gently at Noah, who was now pulling his morning activity choice card from his backpack. Would you like to show your father how you start your day, Noah? Noah glanced at his father briefly before focusing on his card, which showed a picture of the texture board station. He made the sign for play and looked up at Nira for confirmation. That's right, she encouraged softly. You can go to your quiet corner whenever you're ready. They watched as Noah moved to his familiar spot, settling cross-legged before the texture board. His fingers began their usual careful exploration of each surface, his body relaxing into the familiar routine. Elias stood motionless, his eyes fixed on his son. The controlled businessman was gone, replaced by a father seeing his child in a new light. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the classroom, his steps less measured than when he'd arrived. Nira watched him go, noting the slight tremor in his hand as he pulled the door closed behind him. She allowed herself a moment to process the interaction before turning her attention back to her classroom preparation. The morning continued without further disruption, other students arriving one by one to begin their day. The afternoon passed peacefully, each activity flowing smoothly into the next. As the day drew to a close, Nira sat in the reading corner, a specially chosen book about a quiet garden resting in her lap. Her students gathered around her on cushions and therapy balls, Noah in his usual spot slightly apart but still connected to the group. While she read, her voice gentle and rhythmic, Noah sat with his drawing pad. His colored pencils moved across the paper with purpose, creating patterns that matched the story's peaceful tone. Every few minutes he would glance up at the pictures she showed, then return to his art, completely absorbed in his own quiet way of participating. Wednesday morning arrived with a gentle drizzle that painted the classroom windows with delicate droplets. Neera arrived early as usual, her arms full of new texture cards she'd laminated the night before. As she pushed open the door with her hip, she nearly dropped them at the sight that greeted her. Elias Vale sat in one of the adult-sized chairs at the back of the classroom, his expensive suit looking oddly out of place among the colorful educational posters and sensory equipment. He was perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, as if he'd been waiting there for hours. "Mr. Vale," Neera managed, recovering her composure as she set down the cards. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." He merely nodded, his expression unreadable, but lacking yesterday's hostility. The silence stretched between them as Neera began her morning setup routine, hyper-aware of his watching presence. She refused to let it fluster her, methodically checking the visual schedules and arranging the morning activity stations. The familiar sound of small footsteps in the hallway announced Noah's arrival. He paused in the doorway, his Batman backpack clutched close as his eyes found his father. For a moment, tension filled the room as Neera watched both father and son, ready to intervene if needed. But Noah simply blinked, his shoulders relaxing as he took in the scene. Without any signs of distress, he moved to his cubby and began his morning routine. If anything, his movements seemed more deliberate than usual, each action flowing smoothly into the next as he organized his supplies and selected his first activity card. Throughout the morning, Elias remained a silent observer. His eyes followed every interaction, every gentle redirect, every moment of success or challenge. Neera noticed him taking particular interest when she helped another student, Marcus, through an overwhelming moment with headphones and a weighted blanket. During circle time, Noah sat slightly apart as always, but his body was oriented toward the group. Occasionally, his gaze would drift to his father, a quick glance before returning to his current task. Neera led the morning songs with familiar gestures, noting how Elias leaned forward slightly when Noah participated in his own way, tapping rhythms on his knees. The real shift came during sensory break. Noah was at his favorite station, carefully stacking soft foam tiles in precise patterns. He paused in his work, looking directly at his father for the first time that day. His small hand reached for another tile, then extended it outward, an unmistakable invitation. Elias froze. The confident businessman disappeared, replaced by an uncertain father who clearly didn't know how to respond. His eyes darted to Neera, who gave him an encouraging nod while continuing to supervise the other students. With careful movements, as if approaching a rare and delicate creature, Elias rose from his chair, his expensive suit creased as he lowered himself to the carpet beside Noah. He accepted the offered tile with slightly trembling fingers. Noah returned to his stacking, but his body language remained open to his father's presence. After a few moments of watching, Elias tentatively placed his tile on the structure. When Noah didn't object, he reached for another, matching his son's methodical pace. From across the room, Neera allowed herself a small smile as she watched them work together. The other students continued their activities around them, creating a comfortable bubble of peaceful coexistence. For 20 minutes, father and son built together in silence, their matching dark hair bent over their shared creation. Throughout the day, Elias witnessed the full spectrum of special education teaching. He watched Neera navigate emotional outbursts with steady calm, celebrate tiny victories with genuine joy, and maintain structure while allowing each child the space to be themselves. His expression grew increasingly thoughtful, the sharp edges of his corporate mask softening hour by hour. When the final bell approached and parents began arriving, Elias finally stood from his observation post. He approached Neera's desk as she organized the day's documentation, his stance less rigid than before. "He listens to you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of wonder. The words seemed to cost him something to admit. "I've never seen him do that." Neera looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. "Noah understands more than most people realize. He just needs the right environment to show it." Elias nodded slowly, his fingers drumming once on her desk, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his usual control. "I'd like to return tomorrow, to observe further." The words came out formal, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. "Of course," Neera replied, keeping her tone professional despite her suspicion about his true motives. She'd seen the way he'd watched not just Noah, but her methods, her interactions, her whole approach to teaching. There was more to his request than simple observation. As Elias gathered his coat and briefcase, Noah finished packing his supplies. Just before his father reached the door, Noah lifted a small blue crayon in a wave-like gesture. Elias paused, visibly moved by this small acknowledgement. Then Noah turned back to his drawing pad, already absorbed in his next creation as his father quietly left the classroom. Thursday morning arrived crisp and bright, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the classroom floor. Neera was arranging morning activity stations when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Too heavy to be her students, too early to be other staff. She turned to find Elias Vale in the doorway, looking slightly less polished than usual. His tie was ever so slightly askew, and he carried a large shopping bag that seemed at odds with his formal attire. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. He stepped into the classroom, the bag rustling with each movement. "I brought some things for the classroom." Neera's expression remained neutral as she watched him set the bag on a nearby table. Her protective instincts flared. She'd seen too many parents try to buy their way into solutions. But as Elias began carefully removing items, her professional skepticism gave way to surprised approval. The supplies were thoughtfully chosen, weighted lap pads in subtle, calming colors, noise-canceling headphones of the highest quality, fidget toys designed for different sensory needs, and several specialized communication tools she recognized from professional catalogs. Each item was exactly the kind of equipment she would have selected herself, given an unlimited budget. "These are," she began, picking up one of the headphones to examine its features. "I did research," Elias interrupted, as if feeling the need to explain himself. "Online forums, specialist recommendations. I wanted to make sure they were appropriate." His usual confidence wavered slightly as he watched her inspect the items. Neera nodded slowly, running her fingers over a particularly well-designed texture board. "They're excellent choices, Mr. Vale. Thank you." She meant it. These weren't just expensive toys, but carefully selected tools that showed genuine thought and consideration. The morning proceeded with its usual routine, though Neera noticed Elias paying particular attention when she incorporated the new equipment into various activity stations. He'd positioned himself in what had become his usual spot, but his posture was different today, leaning forward slightly, actively engaged rather than simply observing. The calm morning shattered during recess. The fire alarm system was being tested, and despite the staff's advance warning, the sudden sharp bell caught everyone off guard. Noah, who had been quietly playing with blocks near the classroom door, immediately covered his ears and began running, his breathing rapid and shallow. He made straight for Neera, his hands flapping intensely as he tried to process the overwhelming sound. She responded instantly, her movements calm and practiced, as she positioned herself between Noah and the source of the noise. "Easy, Noah," she said softly, accompanying her words with familiar signs. "Quiet hands. Breathe with me." She demonstrated the deep breathing pattern they'd practiced, her movements slow and deliberate. From across the room, Elias half rose from his chair, his face tight with concern. But he remained where he was, watching intently as Neera worked with Noah. Her signs were clear and repeated, a silent language that seemed to reach through his son's distress. Gradually, Noah's breathing steadied. His flapping slowed, then stopped as he focused on matching Neera's movements. When the all-clear signal finally sounded, he was calm enough to return to his blocks, though he stayed closer to Neera's desk than usual. During lunch break, after the other students had gone to the cafeteria, Elias approached Neera's desk. Noah remained in the classroom as he often did, contentedly drawing at his preferred table. "Those signs you used," Elias said, his voice quiet but intent. Would you teach me some of them?" Neera looked up from her lunch, studying his face. There was no demand in his expression now, only a father's earnest desire to connect with his child. She pushed back her chair and stood. "We can start with the basics," she said, moving to a clear space on the classroom floor. After a moment's hesitation, Elias joined her, looking somewhat out of place as he settled onto the carpet in his expensive suit. "This is quiet hands," Neera demonstrated, performing the sign slowly. "It's one of our most important ones. It helps create calm when things get overwhelming." She repeated the motion, watching as Elias copied her. His first attempt was stiff, uncertain. "Like this?" "Almost. Keep your movements smooth, like this." She showed him again, and he adjusted his gesture. "Better. Now try it while saying the words softly." They worked through several basic signs: more, help, stop, safe, with Elias practicing each one until his movements became more natural. Noah glanced over occasionally from his drawing, his expression interested but peaceful. As the afternoon wore on, Neera noticed Elias practicing the signs when he thought no one was watching, his lips moving silently with each gesture. The determination in his face reminded her of Noah's expression when mastering a new skill. The school day ended, but Neera stayed behind to grade papers and update her student files. The classroom felt different in the after-school quiet, the late afternoon sun casting warm patches on the empty desks. As she sorted through the papers in her desk tray, she found a drawing that made her pause. Noah's artwork was distinctive, precise lines and careful shapes, always meaningful in their placement. This picture showed 3 stick figures standing beneath a carefully drawn tree. The smallest figure stood between 2 taller ones, one wearing what was clearly meant to be a suit, the other holding what looked like a book. The details were simple but telling. The way the figures seemed to lean slightly toward each other, the careful spacing that showed connection without crowding. Neera sat back in her chair, holding the drawing gently. The simple image touched her heart, even as it complicated her feelings. She was Noah's teacher. Maintaining professional boundaries was essential, and yet, miles away in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Elias stood on his private balcony. The city lights were just beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, but his attention was fixed on the paper in his hands. An identical drawing to the one in Neera's desk. Noah had made 2 copies, carefully and deliberately. Elias's hands trembled slightly as he turned away from the view. Inside his study, he opened a drawer with a small key and gently placed the drawing inside. The drawer contained other precious items, photographs, small mementos, pieces of a life he kept carefully locked away. As he closed and locked the drawer, his fingers lingered on the key, as if touching a promise. Friday morning arrived with a gentle drizzle that made the classroom feel even more like a cozy sanctuary. Neera knelt beside Noah at his favorite corner station, where the texture board lay spread out before them. Her hands moved slowly, guiding his fingers across different surfaces, smooth silk, rough burlap, soft velvet, while maintaining a respectful distance that allowed him to explore at his own pace. The quiet of their morning routine was broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows and Noah's occasional happy humming. When Elias appeared in the doorway, his presence was different than it had been that first confrontational day. He moved carefully, mindful of the peaceful atmosphere they'd created. Noah noticed his father but didn't startle, continuing to trace patterns on the texture board with focused attention. Elias approached slowly, his expensive shoes making no sound on the classroom carpet. He positioned himself at a comfortable distance, watching the interaction between his son and Neera with evident fascination. After a few moments, Elias cleared his throat softly. Both Nira and Noah looked up, and Elias's hands moved in a careful, practiced motion. "Quiet hands," he signed, speaking the words softly as Nira had taught him. The effect was immediate and unexpected. Noah's face lit up with a bright smile, and a small giggle escaped him, a sound that made Elias's eyes widen in surprise. It wasn't just the laugh that was remarkable, but the way Noah's entire body seemed to relax, as if his father's effort to speak his language had opened a door between them. Nira couldn't help but smile, feeling her professional reserve soften slightly. The man standing before her was so different from the angry father who had stormed into her classroom days ago. His vulnerability in learning something new, his willingness to look slightly awkward for the sake of connecting with his son, it spoke volumes about the change taking place. The morning proceeded with its usual structure, though Nira noticed Elias practicing more signs when he thought no one was watching. His determination was evident in the way he mouthed the words to himself, his hands moving with increasing confidence. During the mid-morning break, while the other students were at their scheduled activities and Noah was contentedly working with his art supplies, Elias approached Nira's desk. "Ms. Ayres," he said quietly, "could I speak with you outside for a moment?" Nira glanced at Noah, who was deeply absorbed in his drawing, then nodded. She led the way to the hallway, positioning herself where she could still see into the classroom through the door's window. Elias pulled out a tablet from his briefcase, his movements betraying an unusual nervousness. "I've been working on something," he said, pulling up a series of detailed architectural renderings. "With one of my company's landscape architects." The images that appeared on the screen were beautiful and thoughtfully designed. They showed a garden space unlike any Nira had seen before. Circular paths with different textures, quiet nooks sheltered by carefully placed plants, areas dedicated to specific sensory experiences. "It's a sensory garden," Elias explained, scrolling through the designs. "See here, these are different textured walkways, and these areas would have fragrant plants, lavender, jasmine, mint. Each section is designed to provide different sensory experiences, but in a controlled, peaceful way." Nira studied the plans with professional interest. The design incorporated many elements she recognized as beneficial for children with sensory processing challenges. There were quiet zones with comfortable seating, water features that could be adjusted for sound level, and plants chosen for both their tactile and aromatic properties. "These meditation spaces," she noted, pointing to several secluded areas, "they're perfect for when someone needs to reset." Elias nodded eagerly. "Yes, and look. These panels here can be adjusted to control light and shadow patterns. The whole space is designed to be adaptable." He paused, then added more softly, "I want Noah to help design it. To make it his space, something that really works for him." Nira looked up from the tablet, meeting his eyes. She could see the hope there, the desire to create something meaningful for his son. But she also knew how important it was for Noah to have agency in this process. "It's a beautiful concept, Mr. Vale," she said carefully. "The thought you've put into it shows. But if this is for Noah, he needs to choose it. His input needs to guide the design, not the other way around." Elias's expression shifted from enthusiasm to thoughtful consideration. "You're right," he said after a moment. "How do we do that?" Later that afternoon, Nira sat with Noah at his work table. She had prepared a selection of plant pictures, printed clearly on cards that were easy for him to handle. "Noah," she said gently, "would you like to look at some plants with me?" Noah looked up from his drawing, his interest caught by the colorful images. Nira spread the cards out carefully, giving him space to examine them at his own pace. His fingers moved deliberately from picture to picture until they stopped on an image of lavender, its purple stems stark against a white background. "Do you like that one?" Nira asked, keeping her voice soft and even. Noah's response was to tap the picture twice, his way of showing definite interest. She brought out some paper and his favorite coloring supplies. Noah immediately began drawing, his strokes confident as he created large green leaves on the page. His attention to detail was remarkable, each leaf carefully shaped and positioned. From his observation point across the room, Elias watched in amazement. Nira moved seamlessly between Noah's world and their own, using art and images to bridge the gap. She brought out more pictures, simple icons showing different textures and flowers, and laid them out where Noah could easily select from them. Each choice Noah made was celebrated with quiet acknowledgement, each preference noted with genuine interest. It wasn't just about collecting information for the garden design. It was about giving Noah a voice in creating his own space, one picture, one color, one texture at a time. The afternoon light filtered through the classroom windows, casting warm patterns across Noah's artwork. His growing collection of drawings and selected images began to tell a story, not just of plants and textures, but of a child's vision being recognized and valued. And in the quiet of that moment, three people moved a little closer to understanding each other's worlds. The Saturday morning sun filtered through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Nira moved between the potted plants with her watering can, humming softly as she tended to each one. The weekend quiet felt different from the usual school day silence, more hollow, yet peaceful in its own way. She paused at the window where a small potted lavender plant sat, running her fingers gently over its leaves. Noah had helped her plant it earlier that week, his small hands careful with the delicate stems. The memory brought a smile to her face as she adjusted its position to catch more sunlight. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her turn. Through the classroom door's window, she caught sight of Elias Vale's familiar silhouette. He stood there for a moment, as if uncertain, before knocking gently. Nira crossed the room and opened the door, surprise evident on her face. Elias stood there in casual clothes, a sight she hadn't seen before, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression that seemed almost shy. "I didn't want to assume," he said quietly, holding out one of the cups, "but I thought you might be here. You mentioned yesterday you come in on weekends sometimes." Nira hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "Thank you," she said, accepting the coffee. The warm aroma of vanilla and cinnamon drifted up from the cup. They moved to the reading corner where comfortable chairs sat in a semicircle. The morning light made the dust motes dance in the air between them as they settled into their seats. For a while, they sat in silence, each sipping their coffee and watching the shadows shift on the classroom floor. "I've been wanting to tell you something," Elias finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "About Noah's mother. About Cassandra." Nira set her cup down carefully, giving him her full attention. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked as he gathered his thoughts. "She was brilliant," he continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "A biochemist. We met at a conference where she was presenting her research. Her mind worked in ways that left everyone in awe. But there was so much more to her than that." He paused, taking a shaky breath. She had learned to mask her autism so well that even I didn't recognize it at first. She'd developed these intricate systems to navigate social situations, to appear neurotypical. The pressure of maintaining that facade was enormous, but she never let anyone see how much it cost her. Nira listened quietly, her face showing no judgment, only gentle attention. Elias's voice grew softer as he continued. "After Noah was born, everything changed. The demands of motherhood, the sensory overload, the constant need to maintain her professional image while caring for a baby. It was too much. She started to crumble. His voice caught. "I didn't understand. I thought throwing money at the problem would fix it. More help, more therapists, more everything. But what she needed was space to be herself, to drop the mask she'd worn for so long." Tears gathered in his eyes, but he blinked them back. One morning, she was just gone. Left a note saying she couldn't pretend anymore, that she hoped Noah would grow up in a world that wouldn't make him pretend either. His hands trembled slightly as he set his coffee cup down. I've carried that guilt ever since, wondering if I could have seen it sooner, done something different. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Outside, a bird sang, its clear notes cutting through the quiet. I see so much of her in Noah, Elias admitted. The way he notices details others miss, how deeply he feels things. I've been terrified of failing him the way I failed her. He looked at Neera directly for the first time since he'd started speaking. But watching you with him, the way you stay so calm, so patient, even when he's overwhelmed. How do you do it? Neera's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as she considered her answer. Because no one ever stayed calm with me when I needed it, she said simply. Her words held no bitterness, just quiet truth. Understanding dawned in Elias's eyes as he looked at her. This wasn't just professional skill. It was deep, personal knowledge of what it meant to need someone to remain steady when everything felt too much. They sat in silence then, the morning light growing stronger around them. The space between their chairs seemed smaller somehow, filled with shared understanding rather than professional distance. Elias's hand moved slowly across the armrest, his fingers just barely brushing against Neera's. She didn't pull away, but her voice was gentle and firm when she spoke. Let's not rush anything Noah wouldn't understand. Elias nodded, withdrawing his hand slowly but without embarrassment. The respect between them was tangible, a delicate bridge built on trust and mutual understanding of what mattered most, Noah's well-being. The morning light continued to fill the classroom, warming the space around them as they sat in comfortable silence, each processing the weight of what had been shared. Their coffee cups sat cooling on the small table between them, forgotten in the significance of the moment. The Monday morning sun painted long shadows across the school's front garden, where 3 figures knelt in the fresh dirt. Neera showed Noah how to make a small hole with his fingers, while Elias carefully unwrapped delicate lavender seedlings from their nursery containers. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and new beginnings. Like this, Noah, Neera demonstrated, her hands moving slowly so he could follow each step. Noah watched intently, then mimicked her movements perfectly, creating a neat depression in the soil. His face lit up with pride as he looked to both adults for approval. Elias handed his son a small seedling, their fingers brushing briefly as Noah accepted it with careful concentration. Gentle hands, Elias signed, the gesture coming more naturally now after days of practice. Noah nodded seriously, lowering the plant into the hole with deliberate care. None of them noticed the quiet click of a camera lens from beyond the school gates, where a photographer crouched behind a parked car. The moment was captured in perfect clarity. Elias Vale, the notorious reclusive billionaire, on his knees in garden dirt, his expensive suit forgotten as he helped his son plant flowers. Beside them, the unknown teacher whose presence had somehow bridged the gap between father and son. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. Headlines screamed across social media and news sites. Mystery teacher tames the Ice King. Billion-dollar love story. Vale's secret school romance. The image had gone viral overnight, spawning countless speculative articles about the wealthy widower and the special education teacher who had apparently melted his frozen heart. News vans began appearing outside the school gates before sunrise. Reporters clutched coffee cups and microphones, jostling for position as parents dropped off their children. Camera flashes lit up the morning like artificial lightning. Inside the school office, phones rang constantly. Parents called to complain about the media circus, about their children being photographed, about the inappropriate relationship between a teacher and a student's parent. The atmosphere grew thick with tension and whispered conversations. By mid-morning, Neera was called into the principal's office. She walked down the empty hallway, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. Through the windows, she could see more news vans arriving, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. The principal's office felt smaller than usual, the air heavy with unspoken words. On the desk lay a single envelope, crisp and white against the dark wood. The principal's face was drawn with stress as she gestured for Neera to sit down. "I'm sorry," the principal began, pushing the envelope forward. "The board has called for an emergency ethics review. Until it's completed, they're requiring temporary suspension." Neera's hands remained steady as she picked up the envelope, but her heart hammered in her chest. The letter inside was full of formal language that basically said the same thing. She was being suspended for inappropriate conduct and potential conflict of interest. She had barely returned to her classroom when Elias arrived, his face tight with controlled anger. He closed the door behind him, speaking in low, urgent tones. "I can fix this," he said, pulling out his phone. "One call to my lawyers, and we can have everyone sign NDAs by tonight. My PR team can black out the story, bury it so deep it never existed." His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, already setting things in motion. "Just say the word, and no." Neera's voice was quiet, but firm as she began gathering items from her desk. Elias stopped mid-motion, looking at her in confusion. "What do you mean? No?" "This is the simplest solution. I can make it all go away." Neera turned to face him, holding a stack of Noah's drawings. "If you erase this, you erase him," she said softly. "This garden, these moments, they're part of Noah's story, his progress. You can't just make it disappear because it's inconvenient." "But your job is to protect my students," she finished. "Even if it means protecting them from well-meaning fathers who think money can solve everything." Her words weren't unkind, but they carried weight. She continued packing, placing Noah's special texture boards and communication cards in a box with careful precision. Each item represented a moment of breakthrough, a small victory in their daily battles for understanding. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped Noah's favorite sensory toys in tissue paper. The next morning, Noah entered the classroom to find a substitute teacher waiting instead of Neera. He stood in the doorway, his small body rigid with confusion. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Neera's empty desk. When the substitute tried to guide him to his seat, Noah bolted to his usual quiet corner. Finding it changed, different, wrong, he crawled under his desk instead. His hands covered his ears as he curled into a tight ball, rocking slightly. Nothing the substitute tried worked. Noah remained unreachable, turned away from the world, his face pressed against his knees. When Elias was called to the school, he found his son exactly as the substitute had described, a small, silent bundle of distress under the desk. "Noah?" Elias tried, kneeling beside the desk. "Noah, please look at me." He attempted the signs Neera had taught him, but Noah kept his face turned away, his small shoulders shaking. Standing in the changed classroom, Elias felt the weight of absence everywhere. Neera's careful arrangements had been disrupted, her thoughtful systems replaced with standard procedure. The plants she'd tended still sat in their windows, but already they seemed less vibrant without her care. The silence pressed in around him as he realized the magnitude of what they'd lost. Neera hadn't just been Noah's teacher. She'd been the bridge between their worlds, the translator of their silent languages. She'd shown Elias how to reach across the gap to his son, and now that bridge was gone. Looking at Noah's huddled form, Elias understood too late that Neera hadn't just been Noah's anchor in the stormy world of school and sensory overload. She had been his own anchor too, teaching him how to be the father his son needed. Without her steady presence, they were both adrift, lost in the silence of her empty classroom. The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows through the classroom windows, but the usual warmth was missing. Noah sat at his desk, shoulders hunched, his texture board untouched before him. The substitute teacher, Ms. Peters, approached with forced cheerfulness. "Would you like to join circle time, Noah?" she asked, her voice too loud, too bright. Noah didn't move, his gaze fixed on the empty chair at what used to be Neera's desk. Ms. Peters looked helplessly at Elias, who had taken up his usual position at the back of the room. He'd been there since the morning bell, hoping his presence might help Noah adjust to the change. But his son remained withdrawn, responding to neither voice nor gesture. "Perhaps we could try some drawing?" Ms. Peters suggested, placing fresh paper and crayons on Noah's desk. The materials sat untouched, like everything else she'd tried that morning. Noah's fingers remained tightly clasped in his lap, his whole body radiating quiet distress. Elias watched as the day dragged on, each hour marked by failed attempts to engage his son. Noah refused lunch, wouldn't participate in any activities, and flinched away from every well-meaning touch. When the final bell rang, he walked to the car without protest, but his usual wave goodbye to the school was absent. That night, Elias paced the length of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below through floor-to-ceiling windows. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors as he moved restlessly between rooms. In Noah's bedroom, he paused to straighten already neat toys, adjust perfectly aligned books, desperate for something to do with his hands. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence heavier. Even the usual comfort of their evening routine had been disrupted. Noah had gone straight to his room after dinner, closing his door with quiet finality. No bedtime story, no gentle signs exchanged between father and son. Just silence. Elias's phone sat heavy in his pocket, Neera's number saved but unused. Pride and uncertainty kept his fingers from dialing, even as worry gnawed at his chest. He should be able to handle this. He was Noah's father. But watching his son retreat further into himself with each passing hour made him feel more helpless than any boardroom crisis ever had. Thursday morning arrived with gray skies and a heaviness in the air. Noah walked into class with the same withdrawn expression, taking his seat without acknowledging anyone. Elias lingered by the door, watching his son's rigid posture with growing concern. The morning crawled by in tense silence until, without warning, the fire alarm shattered the quiet. Its harsh blare filled every corner of the room with deafening sound. Students jumped, some covering their ears, others looking around in confusion. Noah's reaction was immediate and severe. His hands clapped over his ears as his whole body began to shake. Before anyone could reach him, he bolted from his chair, knocking it over in his panic. He disappeared through the door and into the crowded hallway. "Noah!" Elias called out, pushing through the stream of students being led outside by their teachers. His heart pounded as he searched faces in the crowd, looking for his son's familiar features. But Noah was nowhere to be seen. Staff members spread out across the school grounds, calling Noah's name. Elias checked every classroom, every corner, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum as he ran. Fear clawed at his throat as minutes ticked by without any sign of his son. It was the head janitor who finally pointed him toward the supply closet near the cafeteria. "Heard something moving in there," he said, holding out his keys. "Might want to check." Elias's hands shook as he turned the key in the lock. The closet was dark, filled with the sharp smell of cleaning supplies. In the far corner, wedged between a mop bucket and the wall, Noah sat with his knees pulled tight to his chest. His breathing came in quick, shallow gasps, his whole body rocking back and forth. "Noah," Elias said softly, crouching down. "It's okay now. The noise is gone." He reached out slowly, but Noah turned his face away, pressing himself further into the corner. His rocking increased, small whimpers escaping with each breath. Elias tried every sign he knew, every gentle word, but Noah remained unreachable. The sight of his son in such distress, unable to accept comfort, broke something in Elias's carefully maintained composure. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number he'd been avoiding. Nira answered on the second ring. "Elias?" "Please," was all he managed to say, his voice rough. "He needs you." She arrived in what seemed like moments, still wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual professional attire. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, as if she'd dropped everything to come. She took in the scene quickly, Noah huddled in the corner, Elias hovering helplessly in the doorway. Without a word, she moved past Elias and knelt on the floor, leaving space between herself and Noah. Her hands moved in the familiar sign for quiet hands, her movements slow and deliberate. Then she waited, perfectly still, her presence steady and calm in the cramped space. For several long moments, nothing changed. Noah continued rocking, his breathing still fast and shallow. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, his movements began to slow. His breathing evened out, matching the rhythm of Nira's slow, exaggerated breaths. Time seemed suspended in the small closet as Nira remained motionless, patient, her hands still forming that gentle sign. Eventually, Noah's rocking stopped. His head lifted slightly, eyes darting toward her and away again. Nira didn't move, didn't speak, just maintained her steady presence. Finally, Noah's hand uncurled from his side. It reached out, trembling slightly, and touched Nira's sleeve. She smiled softly, but didn't move, letting him set the pace. Slowly, like a flower unfurling in the sun, Noah's body began to relax. He shifted closer to her, one small movement at a time, until he could rest his head against her shoulder. From the doorway, Elias watched the scene unfold. His throat felt tight as he observed the gentle trust between his son and this remarkable woman. All his wealth, his power, his desperate attempts to fix everything, none of it had reached Noah in his moment of crisis. But Nira, with nothing more than patience and understanding, had brought his son back from the edge of panic. In that moment, watching Noah's fingers curl into the fabric of Nira's sweater, Elias felt something shift inside him. The last vestiges of his pride crumbled away, replaced by a profound sense of humility. He stood witness to a kind of magic he couldn't buy or control, the pure, simple power of someone who truly understood his son's needs. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the school windows as Nira sat with Noah in his classroom, her suspension temporarily forgotten in the aftermath of his panic attack. She helped him arrange his favorite texture cards on the desk, her movements slow and deliberate. Noah's breathing had finally settled into a steady rhythm, though he still kept close to her side. Principal Matthews appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and discomfort. She cleared her throat softly before speaking. "Ms. Ayres, I want to thank you for coming today. Your quick response helped prevent what could have been a very serious situation." Nira nodded but kept her focus on Noah, who was carefully aligning the card's edges. He needed support. That's all that matters. "Yes, well." Principal Matthews shifted her weight, clutching her tablet closer to her chest. "I do need to remind you that the suspension remains in effect until the board meeting. Protocol, you understand. We'll see you Monday morning at 9. The words hung heavy in the air. Noah's hands stilled over his cards, his shoulders tensing slightly. Nira placed her palm flat on the desk, a steady presence beside him. "I understand," she said quietly. Elias, who had been standing near the windows, stepped forward. "I'll walk you to your car, Ms. Ayres." They gathered Noah's things in silence. The boy allowed himself to be guided toward the exit, his small hand wrapped tightly around the strap of his backpack. At Elias's car, where his driver waited to take Noah home, the boy hesitated. He turned to Nira and touched her sleeve once more before climbing into the vehicle. The walk to Nira's car felt longer than usual. Their footsteps echoed across the nearly empty parking lot, accompanied by the gentle rustle of evening wind through the trees. Neither spoke until they reached her modest sedan, its blue paint faded by years of sun. Neera turned to face Elias, her keys jingling softly in her hand. The space between them seemed charged with unspoken words, heavy with the weight of the day's events and everything that had led them here. Elias cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For coming when I called, for knowing exactly what he needed." "You don't need to thank me," Neera replied softly. "Noah is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's special to me. They all are." The evening light caught the silver at Elias's temples as he nodded, his usual composed expression wavering slightly. He opened his mouth as if to say more, then closed it again. The moment stretched between them, filled with things neither quite knew how to express. Finally, Neera unlocked her car door. "Take care of him," she said simply, sliding into the driver's seat. Elias stood watching until her taillights disappeared around the corner, his hands pushed deep into his pockets. That evening after dinner, Elias found Noah in his room. The boy sat cross-legged on his floor, surrounded by blank paper and his favorite markers. He was drawing. Nothing elaborate, just simple lines at first, but it was more than he'd done in days. Elias watched from the doorway, afraid to break the spell of this small return to normalcy. The next day, Elias worked from home, setting up his laptop in the living room where he could keep an eye on Noah. The afternoon light filtered through the penthouse windows, creating pools of warmth on the polished floors. Noah sat at the coffee table, his markers and papers spread out before him. Something in the quality of Noah's concentration made Elias look up from his work. The boy had picked up a black marker and was holding it with unusual purpose. Slowly, with painstaking care, Noah began to form letters on the paper. Elias held his breath, watching as his son's hand moved across the page. The letters were shaky but clear, each one carefully shaped just as Neera had shown him in their lessons. Word by word, a complete sentence emerged. "Don't leave again." The marker slipped from Elias's suddenly trembling fingers, clattering against his laptop. Noah looked up at the sound, his eyes meeting his father's for a brief moment before returning to his work. Pride and pain twisted in Elias's chest as he stared at the sentence, the first his son had ever written unprompted. Tears threatened to spill, but he blinked them back, not wanting to disturb this moment with his emotion. In those simple words, written in wobbly child's handwriting, Elias saw everything: Noah's understanding, his fear, his need for stability. And in that moment, Elias made his decision. No more hiding behind lawyers and money. No more letting others fight their battles. Sunday evening found Elias at his desk, papers spread before him as he carefully crafted his speech for the board meeting. The words had to be perfect, clear, compelling, honest. Beside the written pages lay a sheet where he'd practiced signing certain key phrases, determined to incorporate this new language that meant so much to his son. As the night deepened, Elias rehearsed both the spoken words and the signs, his hands moving with growing confidence through the motions Neera had taught him. When he finally felt ready, he went to Noah's room, finding his son still awake, sitting in the reading nook by his window. "Noah," he said softly, signing along with his words, "will you come with me tomorrow morning to the board meeting?" Noah looked at him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he stood and walked to his desk, pulling out the folded paper where he'd written his sentence. With deliberate movements, he approached his father and carefully tucked the paper into Elias's breast pocket, patting it once to make sure it was secure. The message was clear. This was Noah's condition, his way of making sure his father understood what mattered most. Elias covered his son's small hand with his own where it rested over his heart, nodding his understanding. The paper felt like a talisman against his chest, carrying the weight of promise and possibility. The Monday morning sun filtered through the high windows of the school auditorium, casting long rays across rows of filled seats. Parents whispered among themselves, their conversations a low hum beneath the occasional click of cameras from the small press section. Board members sat in a neat row behind a long table on the stage, their expressions carefully neutral as they shuffled through papers and agenda items. Neera sat in the last row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The early morning call from Principal Matthews had been unexpected, just a brief request to arrive before the scheduled meeting time, with no explanation given. Now, surrounded by the growing crowd, she felt oddly exposed, despite her position at the back of the room. She watched as more people filed in, noting familiar faces among them. Parents of her students, fellow teachers, even a few of the older students who had heard about the meeting. The tension in the room was palpable, like static before a storm. Camera phones occasionally pointed in her direction, their lenses catching glimpses of the teacher at the center of the viral controversy. Principal Matthews stood at the podium, calling the meeting to order. The usual formalities began. Minutes from previous meetings, budget discussions, routine matters that seemed to stretch endlessly. Neera's thoughts drifted to Noah, wondering how he was coping with the substitute teacher. She hadn't seen him since Thursday's incident, and the separation felt like a physical ache. A sudden shift in the room's energy drew her attention back to the present. The side door had opened, and Elias Vale stepped through, Noah's small hand held carefully in his. The whispers grew louder, phones raised higher, but Elias seemed oblivious to the attention. His focus was entirely on guiding his son toward the stage steps. Noah moved slowly but steadily, his free hand occasionally brushing the fabric of his father's suit jacket for reassurance. He wore his favorite blue shirt, the one with the soft collar that didn't bother his neck, and carried his communication tablet close to his chest. The sight of him made Neera's heart twist with equal parts joy and concern. Elias helped Noah up the steps, then stood beside him at the podium. The room fell silent as he reached into his breast pocket and carefully unfolded a piece of paper. Even from the back, Neera could see the childish handwriting on it, the sentence she had helped Noah practice so carefully. "This," Elias said, his voice clear and strong despite the slight tremor in his hands, "is the first sentence my son has ever written." He held up the paper, letting the words face the audience. "It's not for me, it's for her." The silence deepened as Elias took a breath, his shoulders straightening. "Many of you know me as the CEO of Vale Biotech. You've seen my name in business journals, heard about my companies, my acquisitions. But today, I'm not speaking as a businessman. I'm speaking as a father, one who, until recently, was failing his son." Noah leaned slightly against his father's leg, his fingers moving in small patterns against his tablet screen. Elias placed a gentle hand on his shoulder before continuing. 7 years ago, I lost my wife, Cassandra. She was brilliant, a theoretical physicist who struggled all her life to fit into a world that wasn't built for minds like hers. Like our son's. His voice caught slightly. She masked her autism for years, pushing herself to appear normal until the pressure became too much. After Noah was born, the demands of motherhood combined with society's expectations. He paused, composing himself. We lost her to suicide. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Neera felt tears pricking at her eyes as she watched Elias's usually stern face soften with grief and love. I thought I could fix everything with money, the best therapists, the most expensive programs, any treatment that promised results. What I didn't understand, what Ms. Ayers showed me, was that my son didn't need fixing. He needed understanding, acceptance, space to be himself. Noah looked up at his father then, his expression open and trusting in a way Neera had rarely seen. Elias smiled down at him before facing the audience again. In just a few months, Ms. Ayers gave Noah something I couldn't buy with all my resources, a voice. not just through sign language or communication devices, but through art, through gesture, through patience and presence. She taught him that his way of experiencing the world is valid, and she taught me. His voice wavered slightly. She taught me how to be the father my son deserves. The room was utterly still now, every face turned toward the stage. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras, caught in the raw honesty of the moment. When the viral photo created this controversy, I offered to handle it the way I handle everything, with lawyers and NDAs and careful PR management. Ms. Ayers refused. She said, "If you erase this, you erase him." She was right. Noah deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be celebrated for who he is, and he deserves to keep the teacher who made that possible. A sound from the back of the room drew everyone's attention. A parent had stood up, followed by another and another. Soon, the entire audience was on their feet, applause thundering through the auditorium. Noah covered his ears at first, but when he saw the smiles, the tears, the nodding heads, he lowered his hands and watched in wonder. The board members conferred briefly, their discussion barely visible over the continuing ovation. When Principal Matthews approached the microphone, the room gradually quieted. The board has voted unanimously to reinstate Ms. Ayers, effective immediately, with a formal apology for any distress caused by the suspension. After the meeting officially concluded, Principal Matthews pulled Neera aside for a private conversation. "I apologize for how this situation was handled," she said softly. "We should have supported you from the beginning." As Neera stepped down from the stage, her heart still full from the morning's events, she saw Elias approaching. Noah had gone to sit with his favorite teaching assistant, contentedly drawing while the adults talked. Elias's hands were trembling slightly as he raised them, forming the signs they had practiced together during those quiet lunch breaks. His movements were careful, deliberate, as he signed, "Safeheart." Neera felt warmth spread through her chest at the simple gesture. She smiled, her eyes bright with understanding and affection, and signed back, "Quiet hands." 2 weeks after the board meeting, Noah's sensory garden had transformed the empty patch behind Riverside Elementary into a natural haven. Morning light filtered through the new willow tree as Noah explored, touching everything within reach. Lavender released its fragrance as he brushed the blooms. Textured benches lined the paths, some smooth concrete with river stones, others carved wood. Noah examined each, his face brightening with every new sensation. Ornamental grasses created natural barriers, their rustling masking outside noise. Noah giggled as fronds tickled his arms. Strategic water features provided calming background sounds as he watched water cascade over stones. The garden exceeded expectations, with every element chosen for sensory experience. Most remarkable was how naturally Noah moved through it, as if the space had been waiting for him. That morning, a small group gathered without reporters or formalities. Students explored with wonder, finding favorite spots among butterfly bushes and wind chimes. Teachers watched appreciatively, recognizing this wasn't just a garden, but a teaching tool. Elias stood with Neera, watching Noah navigate his new domain. The businessman wore casual clothes, reflecting his relaxed mindset. Noah approached with a laminated sign, excited. Neera knelt beside him, encouraging him to read. "Noah's garden," he began carefully. "Where, quiet, grows," he finished, smiling with achievement. Elias watched with wonder. Noah remained himself, still needing routines and processing the world uniquely, but was now more confident. "I didn't think I was capable of peace," Elias whispered to Neera. "You showed me I was wrong." Under the willow tree, Elias turned to Neera. "I don't want this to end here," he said meaningfully. Neera smiled warmly. "Then don't let go." Noah interrupted them, running past with colorful ribbon flags trailing behind him. Neera leaned against Elias's shoulder, their hands clasped. Above them, willow leaves rustled, soft, steady, quiet, echoing the peace that had settled over all three, found in understanding, acceptance, and love. If you enjoyed the story of Elias and Nira, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.